It's 3 o'clock, so we'll get going.
Try to make it.
Yeah.
Do we need to take a roll call, just if we have action here, maybe, to make sure we've got a quorum? I think we do.
I might be. I'll just see how
Bruce Grubb,
Here.
Bob Zimmerman,
Here.
Kevin Campbell,
Here.
Chuck Hendrickson, Jonathan Judd, Roger Olson,
Here.
Mary Sherling,
Here?
John Strand, Jenny Monjo, Nathan Borboom, Dwayne Bretling,
Here.
Corey Peterson.
Here.
So, does that give us a quorum?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, everyone, for being here. You have the agenda. Are there any additions or changes to the agenda? Then I'll take a motion to approve the agenda.
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. And the minutes from the previous meeting. Is there a motion to approve or any changes?
I'll move.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Moved and second to approve the minutes of April 24th. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. And moving on to item number 4, property acquisition status report. Eric.
Yeah, in your packet here, you have the property acquisition status report as of a week ago, May 13th. Again, pretty typical format. The first page is more of an index. The second page is a map showing the acquisition status for all the properties needed for the project. We're continuing to make some progress. You know, we've closed on a few parcels in the last month since this was last reported. We have all of the channel properties under appraisal, and those appraisals are coming in, and so offers are going to be, I guess, as we get those appraisals reviewed and blessed by the Water Resource District, then offers will be made and we'll be in negotiating phase. All of the channel appraisals are scheduled to be in, I believe, by late June. And so, by late June, early July timeframe, you'll see we should be seeing all of these colors along the channel change from the tannish color to a bluish color. And that's just part of the process, and so we're making headway there. You'll also notice that we have a number of properties in the upstream area along the southern embankment and the upstream mitigation area that are now under appraisal. These are property owners that have reached out and asked if we could move things along sooner rather than later. And so that's definitely a good thing, and this seems to be progressing well.
Before you go
yeah.
forward, you've got that box up in the right-hand corner with the Drayton Dam. What's the timing on that?
So Drayton Dam, good question. This is a mitigation project. There's a low-head dam in Drayton. It is the last low-head dam along the Red River from, I guess, start to end. And this has been a project, you know, in Fargo, in the local area, there's been several of these low-head dams that have been removed or replaced with a Rock Rapids Dam over the last 2 decades or so. And so this is the last one. It does have not only environmental risks with fish passage and hazards and things, but it also has a safety hazard. There's obviously the undertow and current associated with this dam, and so there's a lot of desire to get that dam replaced with the Rock Rapids. And this was identified by the Corps into their feasibility study as a mitigation project to improve fish passage, and with the DNR's involvement in the project, they've strongly supported that removal or replacement of the Lowhead Dam with the Rock Rapids. And so that's why this Drayton Dam reconstruction project is part of our diversion project from an environmental fish passage mitigation. And so we do need to acquire some property rights to allow the Corps to complete that construction work. Right now, the schedule for that, I believe, is something in 2022 maybe. I forget the exact time frame. We do have a meeting with the Corps' design team next week where we'll be reviewing schedules and approaches to all sorts of elements of the project, including the Drayton Dam thing. So we'll have a little bit of update on the timeline at that point.
So are there any structures in there?
No, it's just some land, and basically, primarily what we need to buy is construction easements and some access easements. And then there's some debate if we need to buy land in the middle of the river channel. That'll go back and forth, but it seems like everybody's pretty supportive of doing this project, and so we're hoping that this goes relatively smoothly. There was a draft MOU between the Diversion Authority and the City of Drayton that was started a couple of years ago. It's kind of been put on ice for a while, and that's one of the action items that will come out of our technical team meeting next week, is to pick up that MOU and sort of dust it off and move that forward to address the construction, the maintenance, the acquisition, all of the aspects associated with getting that Drayton Dam reconstruction done.
Great. Thank you. Okay, I'm sorry I interrupted, but
Good
continue.
questions, glad you asked. I guess, I don't know that I have anything real particular here to add. The next several pages just generally show where we're at, the cultural mitigation areas. I think we've talked some about that. We'll have a little discussion in our agenda later on, specifically about cultural mitigation. Environmental monitoring, these are the biotic and geomorphic monitoring sites. And so we did receive a request from the Corps recently to go ahead and get the long-term easements for these biotic and geomorphic sites. Again, we'll talk about that as item 5 on our agenda today, so there's some activity starting there. Diversion channel, you can see, we're making some progress. There's some new offers that were presented in the last month since this was developed. Southern Embankment, I guess just flipping through this shows you a status. I guess I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any, but I don't really have any other details or specific things that I wanted to point out.
So we are tasked with getting the channel property rights within, by next April. Are we on track? Are we hitting any road bumps, or how's it looking?
I guess the only thing I would say is two things. One, yeah, we're doing well. We're on track. Our appraisers are doing their job, getting appraisal reports produced. They're going through the review process. I have no reason to believe that we're not on schedule, so I'm pretty happy about that. The only, maybe, I don't want to say issue, but thing that we've run across is there's always this question as to, in areas west of the Cheyenne Diversion, for example, there's questions as to the value of those farmlands. And so we've got appraisers out trying to sort through finding comparable sales and coming up with the market value of those lands. And that area in particular is challenging because is it raw farmland? Is it pure development land? It's probably not either. It's probably something in the middle. And so our appraisers are sort of coordinating and evaluating the market value of those lands that are just west of the existing Cheyenne Diversion Channel. There's been some development on the inside of the Cheyenne Diversion Channel, very little on the outside. And so I think some of the appraisers are talking with the planning directors from West Fargo and from Horace and trying to have those conversations to assess, the market value of those properties. And so that's an area where we're asking our appraisers to pay particular attention because we want to get the appraisals right. And so we want to get those appraisals right before we bring them to the Water Resource District Board for approval, and the negotiations start at that point. So I don't know that there's a problem per se, but it's just an area of attention that we are working on right now. So.
Questions for Eric on any of this?
Eric, when you're talking about that, have you talked to any of the people that are, I'll call it in the newly inundated area, between the Plan A and Plan B, the guys that got involved in Plan B now? Have there's been any discussion with those folks? Are they concerned about their valuation?
In particular, the sort of in the camel's hump, if you will, We've had a number of property owners in that area that have reached out and asked to get started
Right.
on doing some sales. And I think a lot of those property owners that have reached out probably had intentions of, developing that land at some point. And now that, the project has an impact, they're probably not farmers first. They were thinking development land or investment land. And so they're wanting to maybe walk away from ownership of those lands. And so they've asked if we'd be willing to buy those lands outright. And I guess that's been one of the tools in our sort of toolbox. If somebody says, I'd prefer to sell it all, are you willing to buy it all? Our approach has been, yes, we want to be flexible with these property owners and buy those lands. And so you'll see on page 2 of this report, there are a few of those
Right.
parcels that are shaded tan, meaning we're doing appraisals on those. And so I think that to the extent that we've talked to property owners in that area, this is some evidence of that. I would also tell you that there's a number of residential property owners along County Road 16 that also asked to move forward, and we've acquired some of those already through that sort of early activity. And so it seems like it's going well. What was it, maybe 2 months ago, we had that meeting with Stanley Township at the Horace Fire Hall, and a lot of those property owners were at that meeting. And
Yep, that's why I just was curious if that had moved anywhere.
yeah, that was a very positive meeting, somewhat surprisingly positive. But
Eric got an applause.
Oh, come on now. Good. I mean, that's fine. I was just curious, because I know you had that meeting a couple months ago, and I was just following up.
Any other questions regarding this report?
I do like this.
Good. Just for this group's awareness, the Finance Committee asked that we share this with them. I wasn't planning to go through this in any detail with the Finance Committee, but I think they're interested in keeping up to speed and where the progress is. And so it's,
Yeah, and as I mentioned before, I think the full board enjoys
Yep.
seeing this, seeing all the colors change.
yeah, I
so.
think it's in the board package as well.
It is, yes. Thank you. Okay, then you're going to talk about the core easement request, the
Yeah.
whatever it is.
BioGeo.
Yeah.
Lots of acronyms on this project. BioGeo stands for biotic and geomorphic, which maybe that didn't help anything, I don't know.
That's what I was going to say.
Basically, it's environmental monitoring. Biotic monitoring is measuring the biota, snails and worms and other things that live in the muck and the mud along riverways. And geomorphic is measuring erosion or sedimentation. So in this request letter from the Corps, they've asked us to go ahead and get long-term easements to allow them to monitor the biotic and geomorphic conditions at all of the sites. There's 40, something like 40 or 41 different sites scattered across the region here. You can see those sites on this map attached. They're color-coded by watershed. So this is a pretty big effort. There's something like 330 different parcels that are impacted total. The majority of those are on the North Dakota side, although there's a good handful on the Minnesota side as well. On the North Dakota side in particular, we have done some communication with these property owners over the last several years, where there was a right of entry that allowed the Corps and the Corps' contractors to go on their site, place some survey monuments, and do some initial monitoring. And now the Corps is asking us to go, they've kind of firmed up where they want the easements. And so now the Corps is asking that we go ahead and proceed with getting those easements so that they can continue to conduct that monitoring over the course of time. And so we've had some coordination with our team of land agents, our surveying teams from, I guess, both my shop as well as the Houston Moore Group are working on developing legal descriptions for all of the easement areas. We're working on a valuation approach. These are fairly ininvasive, or what's the word I'm looking for?
Non-evasive.
Non-evasive thing, non-invasive easements, where basically all we're needing is kind of an access to the river site where the Corps' team can do some monitoring. And so the value of that easement is relatively small. And so we're leaning on, and in terms of the valuation approach for these easements, we're gonna lean on the county has established a minimum of $750. And so we'll set that as a minimum, and then we'll come up with some per acre or per square foot prices in case it's a larger easement. And so anyway, a lot of effort kind of going on with this. There's going to be letters going out from the Water Resource District to these property owners shortly, letting them know that we're ready to buy these easements. And you know, land agents will be handling that process. On the Minnesota side, the Corps wants us to get all of these easements, but they recognize that we're a little bit further ahead on the North Dakota side right now than we are on the Minnesota side. And so we're planning to hold off to do any action on the Minnesota side until the Minnesota Clay County, Moorhead Clay County JPA is established, which we can give an update later, but basically we expect that to be done in July timeframe. And the Corps is aware that we're gonna do this in a sequence type approach, North Dakota first, Minnesota second. So, wanted this group to be aware of that because there's, you know, a variety of property owners that'll be contacted. You'll also notice if you look at the map, there are areas where it's not under the footprint. In fact, most of these are not under the footprint of the project, and so some of the property owners might be wondering, why the heck is the diversion contacting me? I thought it was being built, you know, 2 miles west or whatever. And so this is, you know, kind of an awareness thing. We've had good communication with most of these property owners over the past few years, and so hopefully that minimizes the surprise factor, I think.
And so, how often would these sites be monitored? And I assume this would go on for maybe decades.
It's my understanding that they want to do a round or two of monitoring before construction, and then probably a round or two during construction, and then after construction is done, it'll somewhat depend on if they're finding any changes. If they don't find any changes, I think the frequency of monitoring goes down. But if they're finding that there are changes, or if they find that we have to operate the project frequently, then they'll want to keep monitoring to just, you know, establish if there is impacts or isn't impacts. So it's a little bit fluid. I think on general, I would assume maybe once every 5 years or so. I don't know, Bob or others can maybe weigh in. But.
I think that's pretty accurate. It's somewhat part of that adaptive management approach. So you monitor, you get a baseline, you monitor, the project operates, you monitor, and if you find impacts, then you adapt. If you don't, then you can reduce the frequency.
So are these permanent easements?
Yep.
And so when they go out there, is it just a couple of guys in a truck and scoop up some stuff? Or is it like a big team of folks that pitch a tent for a couple of days?
It's basically a couple guys with a boat at times. They'll probably have some shovels. They're not taking anything from the site. They're just sort of counting the bugs and, you know, monitoring the soil erosion and that sort of thing, you know, logging some data, not taking anything from the site. In some of these locations, they'll be dragging a boat along the river or driving a boat along the river. It sounds like they've had some good adventures in doing this in the past. Glad I wasn't there, I guess, but.
Sounds like a summer intern job.
Yeah, right.
Okay, any other questions regarding? Okay, well, then we'll go on to item number 6, the processing of special assessments. To be clear, we're talking about special assessments related to relocating a homeowner.
Yeah, so just for a bit of context here, and if you want to read this, you certainly can, but we know special assessments are a hot topic. I think everybody here is aware of that. What this is related to is if we have property owners, many of them, as we're moving forward will be rural property owners where they don't have assessments today. But as part of the federal project, we not only need to buy them out, we need to find replacement candidate homes for them to consider. And those replacement candidate homes are used, there's a search done to find a comparable home that's available, listed on the market today. And that most comparable home is used to establish their replacement allowance. And the situation arises where if rural property owner has no special assessments today or very low special assessments today, and their most comparable home, in many cases, will be in the metro area where there are specials, the question has come up of how are we going to treat special assessments? And I guess that's the situation, because frankly, there's not enough rural comparable homes that are listed for sale. And so as the relocation specialists go to find comparable properties, they're having to look in the metro area just to find enough housing stock to compare against. And so we've had quite a bit of discussion about this with our relocation experts, our land agents, our legal team. The Water Resource District had some discussion about this. And bottom line, what we are recommending is option 3, which is shown on the second page of this paper. And option 3 is a mechanism for us to process and consider partial payment of special assessments for property owners who are displaced. And so if I just turn to option 3, there's an example here where we have the RHDP is replacement housing differential payment. And so the calculation for that replacement housing differential payment would assume that if the home that we're buying is appraised at $200,000 and there's a search done for comparables and we find that the most comparable property is listed at $210,000, and that $210,000 home also has $10,000 in special assessments, the replacement housing differential payment would be $10,000. And so that property owner would be eligible for an additional $10,000 in reimbursement dollars for moving into whether it's this house or any other house that they like. And then below that, you see the incidental expense payment for specials. And so incidental expenses, there's a special a section of the Uniform Relocation Act that calls out incidental expenses, and it allows for the acquiring entity, the Water Resource District in this point, to consider other payment for other things, such as, in this case, special assessments. And so the example here then is if the specials on the comparable, again, are $10,000, and they move to a home where there is $10,000 of assessments, then we would pay down those special assessments in the amount of $10,000. And that was capped, it's capped by the amount of the most comparable property. And so then there's a couple different examples there. The second example, those next 3 bullet points, if the specials at the most comparable are $10,000, but the home that they move to only has $5,000 of specials, then we would be on the hook for $5,000, not $10,000. And similarly, on the third example, if the maximum comparable has $10,000 of specials, they choose to move into a home that has $50,000 of specials. That's their choice. They're fully able to do that, but we're on the hook for $10,000 because the comparable property is used as that base mark.
Do they have to buy down their specials with the 10,000 in that particular case?
That's a good question. I guess I don't know that we're going to mandate that. I think in some situations, property owners may choose to, may not choose to. I think our approach would be we'd need proof that those specials actually exist. And generally, that's pretty easy to find, of course. And so this would be an adjustment made at the closing time for those. And so I don't know that I guess we were not going to be recommending that we mandate that they pay down their specials. If they choose to pay those over the course of time, that's sort of their issue.
Good. I would agree with that. I mean, it doesn't really necessarily make sense for folks to pay down their specials. That's what I've always advocated for my clients. But, I mean, some people like to have a zero balance, but when you go to sell your house, you don't get the money back. So,
So, and just to back up here, so option 2 and option 1 were other things that we considered. I guess, again, we're recommending option 3. Option 2 basically lumps it all in together instead of separating the specials into the 2 different buckets. We think it's better to have them isolated, frankly, because if we went with option 2, and the comparable home had this extra $10,000 of specials, you know, the property owner could choose to, you know, they would be able to get that benefit that the specials provide without actually having, you know, those benefits in their replacement home. And then option number 1 is basically to do nothing with specials, which frankly is allowed under the Uniform Relocation Act, but given that specials, again, are such a hot topic here locally, and, you know, we're going to have a number of these property owners that are rural property owners potentially moving into the metro area. It didn't seem like there was going to be support for giving them the cold shoulder with this kind of option.
it seems like it's reasonable. I mean, it should be part of the cost of the home. I mean, that's my feeling anyway, and I know maybe Bruce can, years ago, and the city of Fargo was kind of as an incentive, I think, when they took a buyout, if you stayed in Fargo, you'd get a forgiveness of, I don't know, 10 grand or something like that.
I forget what the number was, but we were sensitive to that. And I think
Yeah.
in this case, if we're not, we're going to run into problems.
Yeah, no, I think it's fair. I don't know, how does everybody else, any other input?
Well, I think also part of the reason why we're doing this, of course, is the requirement under a federal project to do it with the relocation, correct? And so my question is, do all of these options as you presented, do they all meet that requirement?
Yeah, and I think the reality is we have a requirement to relocate displaced people. But when you get into the sort of the nuts and bolts of the Uniform Act, they give a lot of deference to the acquiring entity, and this is one of the situations where we have an obligation to relocate. The exact mechanics of how we treat specials is not addressed in any detail in the Relocation Act. And so all of these would fit, but none of them are specifically mentioned in the Uniform Relocation Act. And so it's really kind of to recommend.
I guess I just wouldn't want us to adopt an option that could later be contested as not meeting the requirements. That's.
Looking back at Chris, and he's given us we're good. So.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's strictly option 1, which basically do nothing with specials, would comply with the uniform.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Do you need any action on this?
Well, I don't know that we need to, but given that we've had enough discussion about this, I think, and as we work towards moving into Minnesota, I think it would be valuable if this committee kind of gave its endorsement of this approach. That way, we'll have consistent treatment and kind of solidify this approach. So, yeah.
Yes, Bruce.
Madam Chair, will this be a Finance Committee topic as well?
I wasn't planning to bring it to Finance Committee, I guess.
Since it involves money?
Well, it does involve money, but we also have a lands budget, and this is it fitting in with our processing of acquisitions, so.
Thank you.
And would then this be a recommendation for the Clay County, Minnesota board to follow suit? Because I would certainly think that we'd want to be.
Yep. I think
consistent.
and that's where I think if the land committee supports this recommendation, it becomes sort of a policy directive to both the Water Resource District in North Dakota as well as the future.
Yeah, and I agree with that, Commissioner Sherling. I think the one area that we always got to be mindful of, and Mr. Shockley reminds us of it, is there are different rules in acquiring land in Minnesota than there are in North Dakota as well. So I think we have to keep all of those things in mind. To the best of our ability, we want to be able to make the same types of offers on the Minnesota side as what Roger and his group at Cass County Joint Water Resource District does on the North Dakota side. That's the intent, but we gotta follow Minnesota law. But I'm assuming that will work in this case.
Good. Roger?
Yeah, and the joint board did look at this policy,
Okay.
and we're waiting for option 3. We'll support that
Okay.
as we looked at it, so we're just waiting for direction from the land committee.
Then I know there's at least one landowner out there that has specific questions, just wants to know, you know, what they can expect. So I think this is good to get this moved forward.
I think to the rural lands that would be involved with us on the Minnesota side, I don't know of a lot of special assessments in rural areas.
No, but if they move to Moorhead, then they'll
Yeah.
get special
Yeah,
assessments.
right, if they move into,
you
There may be
know.
some drain assessments or something.
yeah,
that are
yeah, they
relatively
could
minor.
have, yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Okay, well, is there a motion for support of this policy?
I would move to recommend option 3.
Is there a second?
I'll second that motion.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. And the motion carries. Thank you. Item number 7, NDSU Ag Impact Study Update, item E in your packet.
As you're maybe aware, we hired NDSU back several years ago to do a study on the impacts that the project might cause on ag production. And in that study, the NDSU Agribusiness and Applied Economics Department really studied the risk of delayed planting on farm economy and farm production. They did a pretty thorough job. They had a lot of input from our modeling team, the Houston Moore Group modeling team, and came up with a pretty thorough report. Since that time, the project has changed a bit. The Water Commission also hired NDSU to expand on their initial study, basically add a few new areas. And we've always known that we would need to have NDSU do another update on that study to reflect the current status of the project. You know, the previous work was all done on Plan A, and now that we have Plan B and that we've submitted a Clomer model to FEMA for their review, we feel like now is the time for NDSU, Agribusiness Applied Economics Department, to update their ag impact study to reflect the current project configuration, the current hydrology and hydraulic modeling, the most recent ag economics data in terms of production rates and all of the like. This study, we anticipate, will be important for the valuation of flowage easements as we look to get that rolling probably in the next month as well. And so at this time, I have this proposal in front of you for NDSU to do this analysis. On the last page, you can see that their budget request is $112,000 and change. This is within the limits that the executive directors are authorized to sign and execute, but I guess given the importance of the study and given that it's been a little bit of time since we've had it done, we wanted to bring it both here as well as to the Finance Committee for your review, your blessing, and sort of awareness sake. And so I think the executive directors are willing to sign this, but they probably wanted a little bit of visibility as well. Looking over at Robert. And so anyway, I guess I'd stop there and see if there's any comments, questions, or discussion.
My question would be, we've talked about the Ag Committee and then maybe having an Ag Subcommittee. And I know, I don't think we've been really engaged, and I just would want to make sure that the questions and concerns that the Ag community might have would be addressed in whatever study we undertake. And I don't know if, Roger, you can address that, or Eric, you, or?
Well, one thing I would add is, Bob and Roger and myself and maybe a couple others did meet with CW Valley Co-op representatives, I don't know, 2, 3, maybe a month ago, and talked with that group about not only their farm business, but also farm impacts in general. And we made sure that they were aware that this was ongoing. We asked them if they had anything, that they wanted to evaluate as part of the study. And one of the things in particular that you might notice in here is we've asked NDSU to produce 2 different deliverables. Deliverable number 1 is basically a new version of their old study. And so it'll be a standalone, new version, all of the backup data, again, that our flow adjustment appraisers can lean on. And then deliverable number 2 is a modification of that study that really aims to understand, is there a risk, or how big of risk is there to the farm commodity businesses, such as CW Valley Co-op or others that might operate in the area. And the scenario in which NDSU had proposed to study that is if a farmer is delayed in planting, typically many producers will switch from wheat to corn to soybeans. Did I get the sequence right?
Yeah.
Kind of. But if they're delayed, so normally they would say, well, I was going to plant corn this year, and that's maybe a higher valued crop. It requires more inputs, but has more value on the back end. If they're delayed, they may have to switch to beans, which could reduce their value, or their profit. And so that's really covered under objective number 1 in the original matrix that NDSU had developed. Objective number 2 kind of puts that on its head and says, okay, if we're delayed at all, then I'm going to choose not to plant anything. And so that means I'm not buying seed, I'm not buying fertilizer, I don't have grain to haul, I don't have these other sort of expenses that would be revenue for the farm businesses. And so we're looking at this as a mechanism of, okay, if there were a catastrophic prevent plant type scenario, what would that be? And so NDSU has proposed this approach to study that. I think what we're going to find is that the risk, the likelihood of that event is very, very low, very, very extreme, but yet the consequence could be pretty significant. And so that's really the objective of studying this number 2. And so it's in response to feedback we've heard from the farm community. And so I think we've done a pretty good job of being responsive to questions and input over time.
Would you concur?
I would.
Okay. I just don't want to have this go through all of the different scenarios and then see that somebody criticizes us for missing something important.
Well, you can throw any obstacle in there. You can throw different prices that will change how this would look, and different prices might affect whether you would switch from corn to beans. The price of beans at $12 would cause farmers to run to beans if corn isn't as profitable. So, or vice versa, they would plant corn longer, if they could, if corn was higher. So hopefully NDSU is able to kind of mitigate those wild swings in what could happen and come with something that's, hopefully their study shows that what true impacts over time and what that average impact could be.
They could probably put together some type of a matrix to kind of show the different scenarios with that, because exactly, they'll change yearly. I mean, they could change in 6 months is what some of those numbers are going to be, so, yeah.
Any other comments? Would you like a vote of support on this?
I think Robert would appreciate that. Yeah.
Okay. Could I get a motion to approve?
Move that we authorize the appropriate individuals to execute the
Yeah.
agreement?
Yeah, I think if you support the co-executive directors in executing this, that would be.
That's a motion. Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Bob. Any further discussion?
Just a question. I see one of my favorite current topics on here under objectives. There's one to evaluate at 10 to 20, 25, 50, and 100 and a 500 year, and also a PMF event. Is that the DNR's version of a?
Well, the PMF is a flood event that is modeled for the project because we have design, a dam design consideration. And so that PMF event is, part of the project design. And as we consider that project design, it's theoretical that this project could operate under a PMF event. The risk of that is something like a 2,000-year flood event. And so.
Well, it's 7 times what we're protecting for right now.
But would be on the hook for compensation for something like that when every farmer in the valley would be flooded?
Yeah, that's my point. I guess that's my point.
And maybe a practical look at it is when we have major flooding, just say like 97, the legal drains that we all pay for as farmers were insignificant because everything was flooded and the water just conveyed across roads and, it wasn't captured within a channel. So when you look at the PMF, that means everybody's wet.
They're also,
All
Roger,
protection is gone, or
Right.
benefits.
those legal drains are designed for a 10-year event.
Right,
It's minuscule compared to what we're talking about here.
right.
Well, I support the motion.
Well,
PMF.
right, I guess to get back to your question, Commissioner Campbell, the DNR's permit conditions require us to get flowage easements up to the impacts caused by the PMF.
Okay, any further discussion on the motion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. I lost my, there we go. Cultural mitigation, item number 9.
I guess just real quickly on 8, the Christine outreach. Just cover that.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes.
Right, just real quickly, we had a
Christine.
real good meeting with the city of Christine, probably 2 weeks or so ago. Christine is a small community in Richland County that has some impacts from the project. The impacts are primarily along a couple lower drainage swales that go through town. That meeting was established after we met with the township down there, and there was a number of property owners within Christine that attended that township meeting. And so the Christine City Council asked us to come back. The output of this meeting was they asked us if we could update a ring levy concept that was developed several years ago based on Plan A. And so now we have the technical teams working on an update to that ring levy concept with intentions of going back to the city of Christine in July to share with them an update on that ring levy concept and advance the discussions a bit further. So just wanted the group to be aware of that.
Great. Any questions? Okay, then cultural mitigation.
Yeah, cultural mitigation. So the Corps is working on this. This upcoming summer, the Corps plans on completing further investigations of 2 archaeological sites along the Diversion Channel. They are currently finalizing the details with one of their contractors for that work and anticipate that field work will be completed in 2019. The Corps has previously coordinated with the Native American tribes and North Dakota Historical Preservation Office in regards to these sites and is in the process of re-engaging with both of those groups as they prepare to begin this work. There may also be some opportunities for the public to participate in those investigations, which the Corps will provide more information once the work timelines are a little bit further established. So we and the Corps wanted to make everybody aware of that there's some cultural work that'll be done here soon. So.
And do we have an adequate timeline to secure everything we need to?
All of these properties have been secured. And so, and recently, we've helped the Corps delineate the work areas within which they can do their artifact finding process. And, obviously, if the weather would cooperate, we'd maybe move things along a little further, but yeah.
Okay, great. Any questions for Eric on the cultural mitigation? And the Cass County Joint Board update.
Yeah. Chairman Sherling. Tomorrow, we'll have approximately 11 appraisals that we will look at, and we will act on those as just compensation for the landowners. And additionally, I-29 surveying is going on, and that work is being done mainly in the DOT right-of-way, but additional rights will be needed, and those are in the process of being acquired. At our last meeting, there was some discussion about valuation of grain bins and how that might differ from other buildings because of the material they made out of, and their usage really hasn't changed since they were put up. So going forward, there'll be more discussion on that and trying to arrive at a just compensation for grain bins that have to be purchased or moved or both. So updates from the appraisers have been positive. Generally seem to be doing well and have developed some relationships with some of the landowners that they need to work with. So really no issues at this time.
The only thing I might add, Roger mentioned the I-29 area where we're getting rights of entries to do soil borings for the roadways. Most of the property owners have been fairly receptive to that, and a lot of them have been within the right-of-way, as Roger noted. And our land agents have been doing a pretty good job getting those sort of voluntary rights of entries. However, there are always a few property owners that are resistant, and so tomorrow at the joint board meeting, we're likely going to be asking the joint board to pass a resolution for a handful of these property owners where they haven't been willing to grant a voluntary right of entry. And so that just sort of ratchets it up a little bit a notch. No court action or anything is taken at this point, but it passes a resolution and sort of a precursor to getting, sort of asking a court to grant us right of entry, so.
So along those lines, I'll ask Chris, there's a difference for the DOT right-of-way than there is for the other lands that we're acquiring, is that correct? The process?
Not for right of entry, no.
No, it's not, okay.
No, right of entry is just the ability to go out and do surveys for design and for confirmation of the design and any mitigation. It's a precursor to the actual taking. We'll have to walk through the process for taking. Adverse at this point with respect to if we can.
We've argued that as part of the project as a whole, we need to do those mobility improvements. There's been some pushback on that, but we haven't had a court actually rule on whether the mobility improvements are pertinent to the project.
Thank you. All right. Any other questions on the Joint Water Resource District? Sounds like you guys are busy.
Yeah.
Then we will move on to the Minnesota JPA update. We heard a little bit about it, but do you have anything else you want to add?
Well, we talked about an outreach. We have met as entities, and we've reviewed another draft. Presentations right now are planned to be given to the Clay County Commission and the Morehead City Council at our early meeting in June. Mr. Shockley will be making that presentation of that draft with the hopes then of each of those entities voting to create that organization late in June. And our intent is then to have our organizational and structural meeting in July and start the process, similar to what Cass County Joint Water Resource District does.
And in the meantime, Eric, we have some Minnesota properties that are being acquired by the Cass Joint Board.
Yeah, I think there's probably a half a dozen or so, maybe 8, I forget the exact number, but that have reached out and asked to proceed in the near term, and we're, I guess the Cass County Water Resource District is willing to do that, and it appears to be a voluntary type transaction, and so it seems to be moving.
And again, just a follow-up to that, as I mentioned during our diversion authority meeting last time, and then, it's the hope from our newly formed MCC JPA that any Minnesota lands that were acquired by the Cass County Joint Resource Water District will be transferred over to this newly formed organization once it's complete. We want to make sure that all Minnesota lands associated with this project are owned by the same entity. So, and we've had that discussion. I think it's their intent to do that as well. So,
I'll just clarify that. Before we agreed to go forward in Minnesota, that was one of the requirements, that we would not own that land in the end. So,
well, that's perfect.
yeah.
Okay, great. Any questions regarding the Minnesota entities? And item number 12, any other business? Any other business? Then I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. You're adjourned.